Welcome to the Impact Founder podcast, the stories that built us. I'm Kristen Darga. I'm here with my co-host.
Travis
Hi, Travis.
Parkinstead. Happy Monday,
Happy
everybody.
Monday. This is the podcast where we dive deep into unfiltered realities, resiliency, and the triumphs and the setbacks of entrepreneurship and the grit that it takes to keep going every Monday, Travis.
I know.
Every freaking Monday. Leadership isn't just about vision. It's about perspective when the odds are against you, the resiliency when everything is falling apart. And today we're sharing some real stories of founders who are pushing through, who have pushed through the toughest moments, creating something really meaningful in the world. Because success isn't just about winning, it really is about refusing to quit. That's why we're here. So let's get into it.
Today, we're exploring how founders are navigating current global challenges, especially the ripple effects of trade tensions, tariffs, and ever-changing supply chains. We have two trailblazing entrepreneurs who are in the midst of real-time resiliency as we speak right now. Whether it's reinventing the plastic supply chains or building a bedding empire from scratch, these founders are proving that resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about adapting, innovating, and staying true to your mission when the stakes are high.
Our first guest is Jacqueline Ross Amable, CEO and co-founder of Material. Jacqueline's shifting the way that we think about plastics, especially in textiles. She has a background in climate tech and startup acceleration. She is taking on toxic, carbon-heavy supply chains that dominate our world, and she's replacing them with clean, sustainable alternatives. Her work fuses cutting-edge chemistry with AI, and her passion for innovation is contagious. She joins us today from Switzerland, so that's fun. Welcome to the show, Jackie.
Thank you both so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
I'm so happy to see you again. We go way back. She was actually also one of the very first founders that Impact Founder featured in our photo exhibit,
That's
very
awesome.
first exhibit. So Travis was one of the first, I guess, the test subjects for our first podcast. And he's been involved ever since. And Jackie and I have gone way back to that day. But Jackie, tell us a little bit about why you started Material.
So interestingly enough, with my first company, I was the inventor and founder of that business. With this one, I sort of fell in love with the technology and the team. I met my now co-founder when I was managing director of venture for climate tech. I was investing on behalf of New York State in early high impact climate tech companies. I've always had a passion for fashion and consumer goods. My first company was in consumer goods, and with what you could say an aesthetic twist for wearables. And but I remember I had this very clear memory. It was 2016, and I asked my manufacturers, how sustainably can we build this wearable? Because they say, it starts at design. Well, I started at design. I started at ground zero. And the answer I got was, you have no options. And I was like, all right, well, what about packaging? Can I at least make my packaging green? I understand my wearable, maybe there's no alternatives. What about packaging? And they're like, well, you can't afford it. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, all right, honest. And so then I said to them, I was like, all right, well, I need to know where this comes from, or where does this plastic come from? I may, now I know so much more about plastic, but I was like, I need to know that this supply chain isn't abusive. I need to know that the workers are treated well. I've always cared, and I've always asked, where do things come from? And so my manufacturer sort of dutifully took me to a plastics manufacturer in the middle of Thailand in a jungle. And I saw my first plastics factory. And it's a very visceral experience. It's something that stays with you when you realize, why has this manufacturing been moved abroad? It's because it's brutal. And even if the workers are treated well, which at this plant they were, it's hot, the chemical smells are overwhelming, and it's just an unsafe environment overall, no matter how well run the factory.
Jackie, it sounds like you spent a lot of time working on your sourcing, and now it's no secret that tariffs have disrupted a lot of different supply chains. So bring us up to speed. You've spent all this time sourcing, and do you find yourself in any interesting position right now that maybe you didn't expect with these sudden tariffs?
I think we're still just at the tip of the iceberg of the tariff impact. For us, of course, there was the immediate stuff was stuck in customs right at a moment where we were bringing in an influx of new feedstocks to make formulations. We've been up against a really tight deadline. And I was really proud of how my team handled it, and incredibly grateful for our suppliers, because as you can imagine, as a small company, we are like peanuts to them, and they still hopped on the calls with us, problem solved. How do we get product there? Things got unlocked from customs just in time. While we didn't get exactly what we needed, they sent us things in smaller quantities in air, just so we could get to this deadline. And so it cost us a little bit, and then we got creative. We couldn't, because of those delays, to meet the deadline. Instead of shipping something normally using FedEx, I had 2 of my team members fly on an airplane with over 200 pounds of slabs of polymer
Oh my gosh.
from the States, so that we could make our deadline. And we did.
Oh my God.
And I think I'm like, wow, that was just like round one of the impact of the tariffs. And so, our team is taking the necessary steps. There's this great expression that somebody taught me with my first company, which is there's, a peacetime CEO and a wartime CEO. And we switch modes, right? You have to think about how do you reduce burn as much as possible until you understand the full effects. How do you continue to meet your deadlines? And I'm always, pride myself and my team and in our creative problem solving in those moments. And so we're continuing to be creative. We're continuing to be lean. We're being leaner than we even thought imaginable, and making the necessary adjustments. But you know what they say, if you can survive these moments, you can survive just about anything. And so our focus is, not just surviving, but meeting the expectations of the customers that we're working with.
Mm-hmm. So I just heard you talk a little bit about sort of acute need strategy, but what's another surprising way tariffs have shaped your strategy going forward now?
I don't know if this is a surprising way in which tariffs are shaping our strategy, but I've always been a big fan of how can you bring your supply chain closer to your partners. That's actually part of the reason I'm in Switzerland, right? Our lab is in Colorado, but we've opened up an office in the Canton of Vaud in Switzerland. And part of that is that the vast majority of the textiles industry is in Europe and Asia. So even before the tariffs, we knew that we wanted to build a supply chain and a team close to our customers. And I realized pretty quickly, hey, US does not have much of not that they don't have a textiles industry, but it's a very specific textiles industry. About 50% of that is for the military. So our focus being outdoor gear or fashion, we have to be close, fish where the fish are sort of expression. And so we're building in redundancy, right? We're looking at not only do we have facilities in Colorado, but how do we build redundancy as close to our partners as possible?
One thing when we hear a lot about tariffs, there's a sort of assumption that we're going to just start automatically making stuff more here in the United States. I think that is, part of the theme that we're hearing. Do you think it's creating more pressure or more opportunity for U.S. manufacturing? And is this something, Jackie, overnight we can just flip a switch and say, okay, we have a whole supply chain and a workforce to now make things in the United States?
No.
We set you up for that one, just so you know.
Actually, as someone who's in sustainability, I think localized supply chains are actually very, very important. But the reality is we currently live in a very globalized supply chain. So while I do think, I don't think tariffs are going to bring about that opportunity. I think they're just going to create chaos at a moment where we need as much stability as possible to get to these sustainability impacts that we need to get, right? There is this looming crisis that does not care about our politics or really frankly cares about our economics. But we have to make the economics work. So we have to sort of look beyond that. So I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I think people have already been working on that. And it takes time. It takes time to build the talent and the technology. And I think a lot of people, what I always tell people is like, I wish everybody could see what I've seen in terms of manufacturing abroad, because I'll never forget with my first company. The first year it was people assembling the product. The next year it was a robot, and that robot was wicked fast. And that was 2016 to 2017. And manufacturing is just so, I think it's just so radically different in some ways than people assume. It's also really dangerous, and so, like right now I'm pregnant. You can't see that on this video, but, I was on a tour of a manufacturer, and they're preaching how safe it is, and they clean their air 50 times a day, and regulations only requires 5 times a day. And as I was about to go on the tour, I had my lab coat on and goggles. I'm like, by the way, I'm expecting, am I still good to go on this tour? And the safety guy flipped out. He I didn't even get to say bye to the tour group. He grabbed my hand, snuck me out some back door, got me out of that building, and was like, no, you can't be here.
Oh my gosh.
And a lot of manufacturing in a lot of countries, it's not that they want to only hire men, it's that they're not allowed to hire women because it impacts their reproductive organs. And so when you think about the lack of safety in these manufacturing settings, I think about the output, yes, definitely the skilled workers and everything, but those aren't the only reasons. Low cost labor are not the only reasons, right? There's a lot of lack of safety. And I think people have to think about the quality of jobs and how do we improve the life for those workers. That's something that matters to me. Having seen those supply chains up front, it matters to my early partners who want to make trade and make business more equitable for everybody across the value chain. But I think people need to go see what they're talking about before they make these massive assumptions as to how quickly we can shift things.
Can I build on that just really quick? You had mentioned robots, I think.
Cool.
So one thing I've when I'm in conversations with people is that, are we going to bring jobs over here temporarily to have humans in them just to be replaced by robots in a few years? I'm just wondering. And then second, do Americans want these jobs to begin with?
I mean, parts of them are really cool. I'm not saying that all of them are, I love manufacturing. So you're talking to somebody that just geeks out hard at a manufacturing plant. If you ever see my VP of product at a textile plant, I love seeing how things are made. For me, it's just so cool. The equipment, I'm like, who thought of this? If you ever see textiles get coated, you're like, whose imagination created these machines? They're just insane. They're just so fantastical. So half the time I feel like I'm in some sort of sci-fi. I'm like, what is this? So I'm not, for me, it's not so much, do they want the job? Do they not want the job? Or we're about to take over? I think it's just the reality of where supply chains exist today, the sheer amount of volume, which I think people can't wrap their heads around, the sheer amount of volume of product that comes out of these hubs. And I think we can build a more equitable world all around, leveraging technology, leveraging innovation. I'm a forever optimist. Any problem that humans create, we can solve for. We have to have that will, and it's not going to happen by taking, a us first approach. It's going to happen because we come together as a global community to share how these things actually get done.
Yeah. I kind of want to know how the sausage is made, so to speak, for material. So I've heard a lot of different companies break down what they would need in order to be successful in the US with manufacturing. Or the one thing that you rely on specifically in the process of making your product, and what that looks like to apply it to the changing of manufacturing in the US, if you could. So kind of break down what you would need to have material exist with US manufacturing. What exact thing? What's the process?
That's a really tough question because there's so many different factors that can impact that success, right? We started in Colorado for a reason. I'm a big believer in building in Colorado. I love it as an innovation hub, as a community, as a culture for where you build a company. And I find a lot of similarities actually with where I am in Switzerland. And it's one of the things that drove me to have these two, I guess you could say, unique hubs. Part of our supply chain is super close to Colorado. The other part's all the way in China.
Mhm.
So that same partner in China manufactures in Europe. And so we build out some manufacturing here, they're actually a lot closer. And then the other one will be further away. Right. So I think if we really want to talk about impact and sustainable supply chains, you hear about this and you hear about different companies trying to tackle it in a different way, but it's localized supply chains, and it's not just for us, but sort of across that value chain. And so you're seeing people tackle it in a wide variety of ways. I think we're really far away from seeing the full execution of it. Right. Like I saw this company and, they're like 3D printing shoes with biomaterials in a localized supply chain. That's really cool. I have so many questions that I don't have answers to, right, when it comes to that unique example. But right now it's hard to beat the volumes of what we see overseas, and it's hard to beat the pricing. And I don't think tariffs are going to fix that issue. I think there's, I think you can win a lot more folks with carrots and sticks. And I think we're seeing a lot of stick action and not a lot of carrots. I've often wondered if a community gets struck by disaster, because saying, hey, for any business that comes here, 0 taxes for 5 years. What would that do? Or here's some incentives to make it financially viable for these localized supply chains to really take root. So while I believe they're all possible, I think we're a bit away, and people tackle that in different ways, right? Transportation of materials, whether by airplane or by boats. People are tackling the sustainability challenges in both of those areas. How products get around the world is being worked on. And so it might be that we just decarbonize the global supply chain and get more efficient at getting products to places. It could be that we build out hyper-localized supply chains where people can build in these smaller factories but deliver sort of on demand. I think it might be a mix of those solutions depending on what we're working on.
Yeah.
We're going to come back to Jackie here in about 15, 20 minutes. So if you're listening and watching, we're going to bring her back at the end of the show for a roundtable. Jackie, thank you so much for these valuable insights. We learned a ton. Kristen, tell us who's coming up next on the show.
So up next, stick around to hear from Colin McIntosh, the founder and CEO of Sheets and Giggles. Learn how Colin scaled his company through a storm of tariffs, which we all know is happening, shipping delays, and global uncertainty while keeping his sense of humor intact. We'll be right back in 60 seconds. Welcome back to the podcast with Stories That Built Us. Our next guest is Colin McIntosh, the founder and CEO of Sheets and Giggles. Yes, as he calls it, the world's sheetiest company. Colin turned a bunny idea into a serious eco-friendly bedding business that's shaking up the soft goods industry. He opens up about the wild ride from startup to seven figures, why betting on yourself is the best bet and the ultimate power move, and what it really means to stay resilient in the world when it throws everything at you. By the way, I also have a set of sheets that I'm obsessed with. So I am a very happy customer here, completely unbiased. Just
I was about to say, easy interviewer.
Not unbiased. I'm so happy with them. But welcome to the show, Colin. It's great to have you here.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. I like what you said about the soft goods. I always say we're not a hardware company, but you could call us a software company.
Oh, nice.
There you go. I was already with the puns. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm so curious, what had you start Sheets and Giggles, Colin?
Oh, I have the dumbest founder story of all time. I have multiple different things. So funny enough, I actually worked with Jackie in my first startup in Colorado. And so I learned sort of how to think about a consumer brand, how to think about, price structure, go-to-market strategy, demographic targeting, brand voice, while working with Jackie at her first company. I was head of biz dev. And after, I think sometime in 2017, there's like three different things. That's number one, is that I had a consumer brand background with Jackie. Number two is that I was watching a movie. This is a true story. It's a dumb founder story called War Dogs with Miles Teller and Jonah Hill. And Miles Teller's character, he's selling sheets out of the back of a pickup truck, if you remember. And eventually he has to burn all the inventory because no one wants to buy it. And I turned to my ex-girlfriend and I said, this is ridiculous. The guy bought all this inventory, did no pricing structure, doesn't understand his demographics, didn't understand his go-to-market. You know what? Pause the movie. And I wrote a business plan for a bedsheets company that night. And every time I write a business plan, of which every entrepreneur has 85, I always buy a domain. And I thought immediately, it just hit me like a punch in the face. Sheets and Giggles, that's the name for my company. And then, about 4 months later, I ended up leaving Revelar, and 3 weeks after that, I incorporated Sheets and Giggles, and I was just off to the races. And 1 year after I started the company, we won first place at Denver Startup Week, and then 2 years later, in November 2020, we had our first $1 million sales month. So it's been pretty wild ride, pretty meteoric at the beginning there.
That's really awesome.
Dumbest founder story ever. There's
I mean, I don't know about you, Travis, but I think for a while there, I had like a folder on my desktop that was ideas, and it was all the business ideas that flood that desktop. Yeah, I think that's a very common founder story, actually. I mean, not common as in it's not special.
Now I'm married, so now I have to explain why I have a $1,000 GoDaddy charge every few months. So
I do the same thing, Colin. I park domains all the time in GoDaddy. Like, it's like, I want to steal the name before someone else takes it. But
in my mind, it's already $1 billion business. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm gonna start giraffecarafe.com one day. That would be carafes in the shape of giraffes. I'm doing it.
Yes.
Eventually, I'm doing it.
All right. No one else.
Hopefully sourcing giraffes and cups is not a huge thing. But let's talk a little bit about your particular business. So bring us up to speed. You've been on a roller coaster ride like a lot of entrepreneurs. So Colin, sort of bring us up to speed with your biggest tariff-related challenge so far.
Well, it's a nightmare, right? I mean, you can think about it in a number of different ways. You have 80 years of free trade where global trade, before the 1930 Smoot-Hawley tariffs, global trade was like with modernized dollars, so adjusted for inflation, global trade was about $3 trillion. After the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, it dropped by 70% to like $700 billion, just a total cratering of global trade. And it's actually what a lot led to World War II, because Japan couldn't get their steel, oil, and rubber from trade anymore, so they invaded Manchuria. So the whole world was like, forget this, we're not doing protectionism anymore. We're going to open up our trade with everybody else. And the global trade market grew over the last 80 years since World War II to $30 trillion. And that has been an enormous, enormous boost and boon for people all around the world, not just in terms of what we can buy, but in terms of what we can share with each other and how it connects us. They say no two democracies has ever gone to war together, but really no two countries that ever trade with each other have ever gone to war. And that's really, really important, is you make it expensive to go to war, not economical. And so when you look at it from that perspective, on the 80-year trend line, I've spent 7 or 8 years of my life building a global supply chain with components that are sourced in India, components that are sourced in Europe, components that are sourced in Africa, that are sourced in the United States, steel from the US, latex from South America. And, we bring these components together in different places. We make our sheets in India and in Bahrain. We make our mattress protectors in Spain. We make our mattresses in Phoenix, and we make our pillows right here in Denver. And so what's really frustrating, there's a number of different frustrating things for me about the challenges that I face. But the number one thing is that all of a sudden, I now have a 26% tariff hanging over my head on my goods from India. And people don't realize what that means. Number one, they don't realize what it means because the water has been so muddied by people at the top saying that other countries pay our tariffs, which is ridiculous. How can we pass a tax on other countries? The government taxes Americans. I'm an American business. I import my sheets from India. I pay the tariff tax. So that's number one, to clear up the muddied waters. Number two, let's say I have $1 million purchase order on the water from my manufacturer in India. If that's $1 million worth of goods that I've already paid for, that I'm paying for, now when it gets here in LA, in order to have US Customs release my goods to me, the privilege of taking the things that I've already purchased and that I've already created, I now need $260,000, 26% of that PO, out of thin air to give to Uncle Sam for the privilege of getting my goods into my warehouse. And so that's the real difficult uncertainty right now. And it's funny because I already pay 11.4% duties. I've paid almost $1 million in duties in the last few years. And so I've already made in my P&L room for tariffs, 11.4%, what I pay from India. I got interviewed by a reporter the other day. She goes, so is it 26% on top of the 11 or 26% total? And I go, I don't know. I guess I'll think US Customs sends me the bill. And so what you're seeing is not just the chaos caused by, okay, we're gonna hurt this international relationship and this international relationship. You're also seeing the chaos of cash flow planning for businesses, because in order to get their inventory, they have to. And this is the last thing I'll say on this, and I'm obviously very fired up about this. We can tax two things. You can tax outputs, which is, hey, you made $10 million in profit this year. Congratulations. You got a growing business. We're so happy and proud for you as Americans. We're going to take 25% of that, and you owe us 25% of your output as a tax. Businesses can absorb that because it's the bottom line that they have cash to give. Right. What a tariff is a tax on inputs. Tariffs are a tax on my top line COGS. Before I ever sell a single unit, they're forcing me to pay the government a tax on the inputs of my business. And any econ major or any econ student with a week's worth of classes will tell you that if you tax inputs, prices go up because I have to adjust for the bottom line. So you're seeing people enter into layoffs in order to free up cash for these tariffs. And you're seeing people raise prices in order to generate cash for these tariffs. And it's a disaster all the way around.
Yeah. Colin, how have the tariffs impacted or changed your plan for growth in that case?
Well, so you use cash for growth, right? And businesses are already reeling from 4 years of post-COVID chaos where, in 2021, there were ships backed off the coast of Savannah, LA, these ports, who couldn't get into port for weeks. But one time I got a phone call from my freight forwarder and he said, hey, I couldn't get into Savannah, so I dropped off your containers in Freeport. And it took me a second. My head was like a potato timer. And I was like, the Bahamas? So I had to, these are the challenges that small businesses have been facing. Such visceral, existential challenges for the last few years of you can't get a plane to save your life. And, you got containers go up by 10x and, freight and shipping costs go up, raw materials, labor costs, and things just start to normalize after 2 years of incredible inflationary pressure from COVID. And now you've got this incredibly inflationary pressure on your inputs and the tariffs. So it's hard to plan for growth when your immediate concern is survival, because you need all of a sudden whatever you're paying. Let's say you over the course of the year, you have $100 million business, which many of my friends in Colorado do, and they spend 20 or $30 million a year on manufacturing. If you slap a 30% tariff on 20 or $30 million worth of manufacturing, you're asking them for another $6 to $9 million of cash from that business just to sell their products. So the answer is it's very difficult to plan for growth. And in fact, what you're seeing is people getting really tight with their cash, and they're not hiring, and they're not spending on advertising, and they're being really protective because they got to make sure they have enough cash on hand to pay for their goods when they hit the port. And that's the really concerning thing about all this, is that there's no certainty, that there's not a tweet tomorrow that tells me, oh, hey, I saw this interview with this guy who owns this bedsheet company, so now bed sheets from India are going up 125%. Like, that's literally the world we live in, where like within April 2nd, the tariffs are announced. 6 days to April 9th. If you had a boat on the water that was arriving on April 10th, I know people that laid off half their team because they had to. You can't wait to see if this person is bluffing. You have to free up the cash, and so these are the impacts that this has.
Hey, Colin, I was in the same boat talking about boats. I needed to make some upgrades on some Apple products. And my consumer mindset was, I'm not paying $3,000 for an iPhone. So I go in, do some trades, and it is slammed in the Apple store, right? So I want to talk a little bit about consumer confidence. We have this idealistic view right now that everything is just going to be made in America tomorrow. Can the consumer, especially the middle-class consumer, is the biggest buying cohort here in the United States, are they willing to pay for 100% American-made sourced sheets?
So there's three answers. There's three answers to that question. Number one, my material is called lyocell. It's made out of trees, and it's never been made in the United States ever in any significant quantity. I would have to set up the very first incredibly scientific facility, which would cost me tens of millions of dollars, to bring in the eucalyptus trees, get the vats of amine oxide, which is the solvent that we use to break down the trees into a pulp, hire the scientists who may or may not be available in the US because they have other jobs doing PhD research in other places, and then have the tens of millions of dollars for the factory space and the machinery to do sewing at scale, because it's a highly automated piece. That's answer number one, is that it's a ridiculous endeavor. Now, if the government were to make that available to me, as like Jackie mentioned, a carrot, I have the expertise in that industry. That'd be interesting for me to do, but that's not available to me, right?
Right.
Answer number two, we already make so much in America. People don't understand this. And it's really interesting. I always wonder, like, when I hear something, I always have a second thought. I'm always like, I wonder. So like, it's like, we got to bring manufacturing back to America. My brain goes, I wonder how much we already make in America. So if you just look it up, we make 3 times the manufacturing output today as we did 40 years ago in 1985. And we do it with 1/2 the employees in the manufacturing sector. So you've had a 6x increase in productivity of the average employee in the manufacturing sector. 3 times the output, 1/2 the employees. So the second answer to your question is, we already make a tremendous amount in America, but we do it with 1/2 the people 40 years ago, because automation is taking manufacturing jobs, not offshoring. We've grown the pie of manufacturing globally so dramatically. Like, China is a great example of this. We import $430 billion from China every year, right? And that, by the way, gets marked up at retail. So that's trillions of dollars in retail value of our GDP that we bring in from China. But they bring in $140 billion of stuff from the US, exports from our businesses to them. If you do the math, they got about 4 times the people as us, with about 3 times the exports. So on a per capita basis, we actually export more to China than they do to us. And so there's so many different pieces here that get lost in the national conversation. It's a dumb conversation nationally. And it's impossible to talk about it like on this level. So I'm really grateful that you guys are asking me these questions, because I feel like I have an outlet to express these things. And the final answer to your question, the third answer. So first one is no, you can't do it because it's not feasible. It's too expensive. We've never made the product here in the first place. Number two is we already make a ton here, but the jobs aren't there with manufacturing. And number three is this is fascinating. There's an A/B test that a company just did. It's on fire right now in the e-commerce world. I'm getting texts this study every single day. They raised their price about 100% what they would need to charge if it was a shower head, what they made if they made it in America. You can Google this, like AB price test shower head tariffs. And they sent tens of thousands of visitors via advertising to two different pages, one with the normal price with the made in China product for like $129, and then one with the made in America price of like $219. And not only so the Chinese one converted at about 3%, which is like a pretty average e-commerce conversion rate, like 2.8%. The American product did not sell a single shower head, not a single sale at a $100 higher price. And so there's a reason why price elasticity exists as a term and a concept in economics. People are willing to pay more for certain products, and they're not willing to pay more for other products. And if people are price sensitive, it's simply not true that they would be happy to pay more for the same products that are made here versus elsewhere. It's just not true. It's a falsehood. There's so much baked into that question. The assumption that the quality would be the same or superior. Like sorry, I know I can talk for hours about this stuff, but there's one last thing. It's called comparative advantage in economics. Americans are amazing at making high tech, like digital products and services that nobody else in the world can match. And that's a huge amount of our economy. We're not very good at textiles. Just Jackie mentioned, we're not very good at apparel. We're not we have wonderful fashion designers and small boutiques and different things like that make, small run clothing and shoes. But on a scale perspective, it's great that those other countries have taken on what are really industries from the past so we can move into the future. And the pain that you're seeing, what's really happening is that people who used to do those jobs were discarded by the people in power who made these decisions to send these jobs overseas and to automate these jobs here at home. And this is the desire to not be forgotten and to be brought into the future. And so what you've seen is a massive amount of gain in these new industries that have been allowed to thrive with that creative destruction and that comparative advantage, allowing these other countries to do these past industries. But we haven't taken that gain, that really privatized, concentrated gain, and given it to other people in our communities and in our countries in the form of healthcare, education, and other policies that would really help people's lives.
I love that you're fired up about this, Colin, and we're going to give you a whole nother segment.
I'm going to launch my political campaign right here, right now.
No, it's all good. It's all good. We're going to be bringing Colin back. Tell us what's coming up next.
So coming up next, we are going to continue the conversation. So what we just started there won't stop. We'll be talking about tariffs again with both of our guests. So we'll be right back. That built us. Now let's dive into a conversation that's going to pull it all together. We welcome back Jackie Ross Amable of Material and Colin McIntosh of Sheets and Giggles. We'll have a roundtable discussion on entrepreneurship in the face of this global disruption. I am just so happy with how you both have shown up. I really appreciate your generosity and being honest and just straightforward about where you are with your business. We're going to start with one question. It's kind of my question of impact founder. Have you ever wanted to just throw in the towel because of tariffs and just be really honest about that? We'll start with Jackie.
No.
No.
I mean, when the first week was infuriating, like just absolutely infuriating, because sort of to the point Colin made, it was just the so much unknown. And in those moments, I'm actually always say I'm really grateful that I'm a mom, because I just, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to focus on what's in my control, and what's out of my control, I'm just going to go focus on my kid and like not even deal with this, because you were stuck in this mode where I just had to wait to hear. And I could obsess about it, or I could go for walks with my kid and wait to hear the news. And some news was mixed. Some news was good news, some news was bad news. But, we got enough news pieced together. I always say is you need enough things to go right to not throw in the towel. And we had just enough things continue to go right. But I mean, it makes you want to shake somebody, but not throw in the towel. At least not me.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. I actually say I don't have a company that's impacted quite the way yours is, still impacted, but I could identify with wanting to shake someone for sure. And I wasn't going through all the, the math of the things stuck in different shipping ports and trying to release it. Right. So, what about you, Colin?
I mean, yeah, it'd be a lie if I said no. But also I'm in a different stage of my business than Jackie is, right? Like Jackie, when did you just join as CEO? Like
2 years ago now.
2 years ago, right? So it was just, I mean, I'm so happy to see you back in the startup game and leading another company, especially in the sustainability space. But I went through COVID with an e-commerce company. And so like e-com founders, like getting through COVID was like the hardest thing any of us ever had to do. And in my case, I shipped my first box 18 months before COVID broke out. And I was a 27-year-old first-time founder. Then I was a 29-year-old first-time founder going through COVID, locked in, doing remote teams, the logistics chaos. So I finally felt like in 2023, 2024, things were finally on the upswing. So then for all this to just kind of come crashing down and increasing our cost of production so suddenly and dramatically, it's brutal. I mean, it's just exhausting. But what I would say is, instead of throwing in the towel, it's more like there's always opportunity in crisis.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you have to think about is, okay, well, I have this diversified global supply chain for a reason. I've put in a lot of work in my relationship building over the years. What's the smart move? How can I leverage this moving forward in my space in order to dominate when others are folding? And so that's kind of the where you come out of it on the other side, after maybe you have a couple beers or you get some good sleep. Then you can think about it a little more clearly and a little less woe is me. But there's some big time woe is me stuff the last few weeks.
So, not to be punny, but there sounds like there's a lot of sheets and not a lot of giggles sometimes.
Yeah.
But
yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, on that note, Jackie, I'm going to throw this question to you and back to Colin, because I know Colin's fired up right now. So you'll have a second to think about this one. But Jackie, do you have your biggest piece of BS that you've had to deal with because of a tariff? And Colin, that'll go to you next. So is there like a biggest piece of BS that you've had to deal with that you're like, really? Like, this is what I'm going through right now. This is what we've come to.
The boat was canceled. There's a product we've been working on getting to the States. It took months of back and forth, because we are a small company. So it's not like we can buy containers worth of feeds.
Mm-hmm.
So our massive suppliers have to make an exception for us. They have to go through hoops for us, right? For us to get to work together. And again, like, thank God for our suppliers, because they actually picked up the phone and spoke to us. But, I'll never forget, like, we were like, okay, it's on its way. And then the very next day, the email's like, the boat was canceled due to so many people canceling their imports. And there was we did not know when would it get on when would the next boat even leave, because our orders are, again, it's not containers full. So I can't command a ship. I can't command a container. I am, I have to be moved with other things. And because it's chemicals, right? There's all kinds of, there's a lot of paperwork. And so, I'm just sitting there and I open the email and we're like trying to meet this deadline. And they're like, the boat was canceled. Hang tight for when the next boat goes out. And that for me was just infuriating, because a company like ours, it takes years to get to the point where I can order a drum of something like that. It's meaningful. It's so meaningful for a company like ours. And, I think it's on a boat now. I don't actually know. Find out.
I think, to piggyback off what Jackie's saying, this isn't like a flight where it's like it's scheduled at 7:15 p.m. and the plane's empty and it's a Tuesday night and it's like, oh, nice, I have extra leg room. Like, the plane's going to go off anyway. Like, these boats have to be full of containers that are full of goods in order to be economical to move this type of inventory. And so what Jackie's describing is an interconnected global supply chain that's been painstakingly, meticulously built over nearly a century of, from highly intelligent people who lived through the last time this was tried. And you cause an enormous amount of chaos and disruption if you don't do these types of things thoughtfully over time and give businesses stability and time to react to this news. So that's the biggest frustration for me, to answer the question as well, is the time scale of these type of things. Like, businesses can always manage their way around certain things if they're given enough time and enough thought. These type of sudden cancellations. I mean, I saw a picture of some harbors today, like Seattle Harbor and others are like totally empty. And one misconception, and I get more frustrated about the broader conversation because, as someone who literally pays tariffs, as someone who's literally looked at his P&L and seen hundreds of thousands of dollars a year going to tariffs, which is just money that I could be spending elsewhere, right? On people, on marketing, on all sorts of different things. But no, that's a tax on my inputs that I'm sending to the government. The most frustrating thing for me is I feel like I'm having a conversation with people who are denying my reality, which is weird. Like, I'm Jackie's probably laughing because I'm a 34-year-old guy who's never had anyone ever deny my reality in anything I ever said, right? And now I'm like, no, I pay tariffs, and people are like, no, other countries pay tariffs. I'm like, no. I'm like, here's the receipt, like that. So that's probably my greatest frustration. And then, of course, just the
and then we don't know what the receipt will say.
It's so frustrating, and it's crazy. And then trying to book air freight out of Asia right now is because people, you probably saw a meme about Apple flying iPhones back and forth, Pablo Escobar. Literally, these are time stamped, right? So if he says April 9th, then on April 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, and 8th, you better get your shit, on a plane, and you better get it to your warehouses in the US, because if you can get it through customs before that timestamp, you don't owe the tariff. And so it causes all sorts of chaos in terms of businesses who maybe need supply, can't get it. And, like Jackie said, we're small businesses. 46% of Americans are employed by small businesses. That number used to be 70% when we were kids, and small businesses in a free fall in this country. And so there are a ton of small businesses whose backs are built off the back of importing. And so right now they cannot get their goods because they can't get boats and they can't get planes to save their life. And then they're going to get out of stock.
Here,
yeah.
Sorry, the price difference on boats and planes is massive.
Massive.
To ship a 1/20th of what I want on a boat versus an airplane costs me the same amount for the smaller amount. But if I wanted to ship the same amount of product on boat versus airplane, it's 7 times more expensive. Times more expensive
per unit. Per unit with like sheets, for example, might be 25 or 50 cents per unit to ship it by boat. By plane, it could be $7-8. And then, when these type of massive demands occurs, whether it's COVID or this, that can shoot up to $20-30 a unit. Like, and these price, and it's just supply and demand. There's not enough planes. So
can I ask you a very basic question here? Is this normal? So, and I know it's so basic, but I think people get wrapped up in the media and they're like, oh, this is just another tariff thing. Jackie and Colin deal with this all day long. It's just another blip. But the basic question, is this normal? And should we be normalizing this chaos?
Can I take this one, Jackie?
Please.
Sorry. So, no. Building a business is so hard. You have an idea, you have nothing but an idea. Then you have to create something out of nothing, out of thin air. Jackie's done that a couple times in her life. I've done that once. Then you have to find people to buy it and market to them. Then you have to have the capital to do that. Then you got to build the product. Then you got to ship it. Then you got to deal with returns and customer care. Then you have to come up with new creative because people get bored of your old creative. And then you have to do this year after year, season after season. And you got, I got to add this color and that size. And oh my God. And somehow you build a business. And it's 16-hour days and you fall asleep with your laptop on your stomach and you wake up at 7 a.m. and you take pre-workout and you gain 30 pounds. And this is the process, right? And then for someone to come in at after years of playing by the rules and years of building your business according to the system that's existed under multiple administrations, including his first one, mind you. Mm-hmm. Now you're asked to play a completely different game on the fly with no time to prepare for it. So no, it's not normal. The government should exist to make our lives better and easier. And so for the government to do something like this, which makes our lives more difficult and worse, is the opposite of what the government should be doing. And there's everyone in the world who wants to talk about short-term pain, long-term gain. That's a thought-terminating cliche. Let me explain that phrase. That's a cliche that shuts off the reasoning center of somebody's brain where they don't have to think about what they're saying any further than that sentence. So when I talk about the pain that I'm experiencing and that other of my founder friends are experiencing, and someone says, yeah, well, it's short-term pain for long-term gain, that allows them to just shut their brain off and not think about it for one more second and go, I wonder if there's 600 years of literature on tariffs that I can read about the long-term impacts of protectionism, right? Anyway, I'll be quiet now, but it's driving me crazy.
Well,
what I'll add,
sorry, Jackie.
No, what I'll add to that is to build in the kind of space that Colin and I build in, supply chain intensive companies, it requires that you know your numbers in and out. It requires that you understand the impact of if something shows up late or if a customer returns something. You have to know those numbers. And so when something throws those numbers, not just like in a tizzy, but like into a tornado where you don't know what those numbers will be on the other side, you do have to make some decisions. You don't want to make rash decisions.
That's
because
the hard part.
This is clearly, a set of policymakers that change their mind quite frequently. To quote one of my investors from the Collaborative Fund, Sophie Bacalar, she had this hysterical quote. She goes, nobody knows what's coming. I suspect even most Donald Trump. I don't think there's a plan.
Concepts of one.
I have to know so many variations of my numbers and where it could possibly land. And you have to prepare without overreacting, and that you have to fight this like knee-jerk reaction while still taking action, and it's incredibly stressful.
I mean, I kind of even think about what Colin was saying about the short-term pain, long-term gain. And, the only thing that I hear is that 40% small business sort of employment in the country is probably going to be 10% at that point, because
I mean,
you'll lose the majority of your small businesses in that short-term pain, because businesses, the majority of them can't survive, or a lot of them won't survive, but not that they can't. I think they're, like you said, just position yourself to kind
but
of
it's
fight
hard. It's hard.
differently.
Every coffee shop
Right.
imports from Colombia,
Right.
Ethiopia, da, da, da.
Absolutely.
Every kava bar, right? Every retailer with knickknack stores, and
Right.
there's a wonderful mercantile and Morrison's Mercantile in
Yeah.
Colorado that does. And it's the thing is that like I think one of the greatest misconceptions that we have as Americans is that 100% of every dollar a company spends is spent on manufacturing. And
Mhm.
the reality is, for most companies, it's probably about like 20 to 30% of every dollar they spend is spent on manufacturing. So yeah, I've spent millions of dollars, or I spend millions of dollars every year in manufacturing overseas, sure. But I spend tens of millions of dollars in the US on payroll, logistics,
Mm,
freight, warehousing, software, insurance. It takes a village to run a business. My fractional
Yeah.
CFO, my attorneys, right? Like these are so that's one of the things I really want to put out there to people is like, yes, I make my sheets in India, but I make my pillow in Denver with Mile High Workshop, which employs formerly incarcerated Coloradans, pay them a
mhm.
living wage, and it lowers our local recidivism and lowers our local homelessness. And that is enabled because, as Jackie's alluded to a couple times, an overseas manufacturer took a chance on working with me 7 years ago. They didn't have to work with the guy with no experience in the industry who had the pun-based betting idea, but they did, and they took a flyer on
Yeah.
me, and it turned the millions of dollars of business for them, right? And that's great. But that's why they take chances with small businesses. With this mess, one of the great risks you're going to see is that large manufacturers and other manufacturers, both up here and abroad, they ain't going to want to do business with small businesses. They're only going to want to sell to large businesses because there's too much uncertainty with working with small businesses if this is the way the environment's going to be.
There's
We've got a wrap-up question here from Kristen,
Yeah.
and two, we're going to have more trade discussions. So we'd love to have you guys back in the future too, and folks who are listening, because this is completely fascinating.
Yeah. There's one thing that I keep hearing, and it's, I still see a lot of people saying, I see a lot of sales right now. The prices haven't increased yet. I don't see an increase. Where are these tariffs? I don't see how they're impacting me. I'm hearing a lot of this in general conversation. What do you say to that? Why are there sales? Why is this no increase happening yet? Tell me about that.
I have
Jackie,
a,
you want to go first?
I have a story, and I think it has to do with how bullish entrepreneurs are. Actually, my former CTO of Revelar told me this story. He said that he was working in Thailand, and it was 3 a.m, and he had moved his whole family to Thailand to work with this manufacturer. And this was years before we worked together. And there was a coup. The military took over the Thai government. And Tom just was like, what does this mean for my family? What do I do? And he called his boss, who ended up being who I ended up getting to partner with, decades later, and goes, what should I do? Should I flee the country? There's a coup. Should I do this? And he goes, Tom, go back to sleep. This happens all the time in Thailand. And tomorrow, you will see like just the resilience of business people, right? Like, and he did. He said the next day, he's like, maybe all these machinations were happening. And so, these tariffs are real. They're impacting real companies. But I think entrepreneurship has survived. Like it's just incredible, the resiliency within that community. And I think what people are seeing is the resiliency and people waiting until the very last minute to really have to impact their customers. Because if you don't have to impact your customers, you don't want to. You build products because you care about the person you're serving in some way, shape, or form. And so for me, like, am I feeling the impacts? Yes. will I think we continue to see the impacts in my industry? Yes. I think we're at the very tip of the iceberg. And so there's still a lot of a ripple effect to hit, but entrepreneurs will keep building. And that is like the one thing I know to be true.
And that's so generous that, people withhold the upcharge until they have to. I feel like that's a generous thing to do, because they could put a tariff on there right now. Realistically, put an increase, not a tariff, but an increase
Or would people
in
buy
order
it?
to.
Like Colin said
Yeah.
earlier, right? Like there's price
Who
elasticity.
knows?
Like
Right.
I've got a slightly
Yeah.
different. So that's I love your answer, Jackie, and it's a very like the sun also rises answer. Like it, like there's.
Yeah.
I do know plenty of people, myself included, who haven't raised prices yet because we're waiting and seeing, and we're trying our best to figure this out. That being said, and there's two things here. Number one, it's very, very hard to read the tea leaves on this administration. So a lot of companies, April 2nd, they panicked. April 6th, he announced a 90-day pause or whatever. It was the 7th, I can't remember, it was whichever day he wanted the stock to go up for his buddies. And, then, so companies freaked out. They had a 5-day freak out period, but like they're still waiting and seeing. And, but the people who manufacture in China are freaking out. They're still freaking out. Their prices are going up. And so what I'd say is I'll be a lot more, I'll be as real as I can be. Consumers, if they think they're not being charged more, that means that the marketers at these companies are doing an excellent job.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll tell you right now, I was on a call with 100 other companies 2 weeks ago in which we discussed how to raise our prices without people noticing. And it's literally called A/B price testing. You can show one price to 20% of visitors, another price to 20%, another price to 10%, another price to, and you can show it to them on their mobile phone versus their desktop, and they'll never see a different price if they're the same person. And you can test to see what is the conversion rate on this price, What if we raise our prices and do a cross out? What if we offer free shipping, but what if we offer paid shipping, but at a lower price? The fact of the matter is that companies are doing everything they can to psychologically manipulate you at checkout in order to get your AOV, your average order value, as high as possible, both in anticipation of the tariffs, because they cannot wait around to see if this is serious, and in reaction to the tariffs when they actually do go through, like the Chinese ones. And so there's been a lot of movement already on pricing. And I think that maybe people aren't seeing it because we do make a lot of food and agriculture here in the United States. So a lot of things, some things at the grocery store will absolutely go up that we import from other countries, but a lot of staples will remain fairly stagnant with this. But the price of a lot of other things in terms of like discretionary spending is already up. And I think that marketers and entrepreneurs, like Jackie just said, very talented people, and they will figure out how to raise their prices $2 or $3 without you ever noticing. And that's the truth.
Jackie and Colin, this has been extremely informative. Like, man, we've gone down so many different paths today. I've learned way more about tariffs and the underbelly of it and the impact. What can I do? Wish you good luck. I mean, that's such a weird thing right now, but
Wow.
It's
if I know
fine.
anything, the two individuals we have here are incredibly resilient. Just from what I've witnessed with Revelar and just in the past, and who both of them are, and they will weather the storm, whatever it looks like, and whatever that result is, they will weather that.
Right.
And that's really what resiliency is, right?
And we have each other to commiserate. Jackie and I have known each other for 20 years at this point. So we definitely it's good to have a community. So we appreciate you guys.
Exactly. Yeah, but exactly. They've known each other for a while. There was a wedding officiant somewhere.
I know. I heard.
Past, and they went to school together. So
Jackie didn't even know I was going to be on this with her, Krista. I didn't even tell her.
It was the most fun surprise when I saw that.
Oh, good. I loved it. Look, both of you, thank you so much for being here. We're going to come back with our takeaway. You're released for the day, but we appreciate your presence, your information, your contribution. So thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
For having us.
Take care.
This is very fun.
stories that built us. This segment, we share our takeaway from today's conversation about tariffs with Jacqueline Ross Amable and with Colin McIntosh. So, Travis, what is your takeaway?
So a few things that really stood out to me. One, when Jackie mentioned being a wartime CEO. Like, I really think that's like...
I have that circled 3 times.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I think that is what a lot of us just go through on a daily basis when we're leading, but I think it stands out even more today. I also think it was really interesting to talk about how deep the supply chain is and mentioning that it's a global community, really, when we look at businesses. And that, as Colin mentioned, that uncertainty in cash flow chaos, because businesses live on cash flow, right? So I thought those really stood out to me.
Yeah, those, I have circled a couple of those on mine too. I think if I keep it quick, my takeaway is actually something that was said close to the end. And it was this A/B testing thing, which most founders know about, but most consumers don't know about this, right? Like, a lot of consumers don't realize that that's going on. What I would say is that I think what we think we see and witness isn't the only truth. And that's not something that was said today, but I think that's something that's prevalent everywhere. What we see and we witness isn't always the truth. If I see his sheets for $199.99 or whatever, and you see them for $97, that's your truth. That's my truth. And I think there's a lot of A/B testing out there in the world and what we're experiencing around these conversations even.
Right.
So I do appreciate that, that information as a takeaway. But also just that founders, go back to sleep. This happens all the time. You'll see resiliency in business. Like, this is a common experience for founders to weather these kind of storms. So those are my 2 takeaways. But in the end, I've learned so much today just from the 2 of them, and I really appreciate them being on.
If you're a business owner out there listening, watching us, right now, just listen to our last 2 guests. You can get through it. And, we just need to exude confidence.
Community is the source of resilience too.
Agree.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for listening and watching our podcast today. We will be back in a few weeks. Enjoy the rest of your Monday.
We'll see you then.
See ya.